very recently, Anuj Dhar and Chandrachud Ghosh, two very hard-working researchers on Netaji, indefatigable researchers on Netaji, have come out with a massive and very well researched tome called Bose, Deception Declassified. They have pored over the hundreds and hundreds of files which have been declassified by the Government of India, Government of West Bengal, and have come to some very startling conclusions. In the main, they have concluded that the Government of India was well aware that the Bose death story in the air crash in Formosa on 21st, 22nd of August was a fabrication created by the Japanese intelligence agency to help Netaji escape to Manchuria, go to Russia, go to Omsk in Siberia, where there was Azad Hind, government of Azad Hind, Free India government in exile, embassy established in Omsk in Siberia. He had gone there to continue the war for the independence, for the liberation of India, now from Russia. In fact, he was interested in transferring many units of the INA into Russia to continue the fight. These conclusions are very much similar to the conclusions I have arrived at, and I had written these books long ago. This is Bose, an Indian Samurai, and then I had come out with Bose, the military dimension, a military history of the INA and Netaji, which incidentally is now a textbook on the INA prescribed for the army promotion examination. And of course, my most, I would say my best-selling book, which has really alerted the Indian academic community and the global community to the truth about Bose, about who really got us independence. Bose या गांधी किसने दी भारत को आज़ादी? Bose or Gandhi, who made India free? This was translated into Hindi and into many some other languages also. Now our conclusions are quite similar. It is confirmed that Bose did not die in the air crash in Formosa. How? I had mentioned it earlier, and Bose and Chandrachud Ghosh and Anuj Dhar have reconfirmed that in a written communication, the government of Taiwan, the government of Taipei has clearly told the Indian government that there was no crash in Taipei, in the whole of Formosa, from 21st August 1945 to 25th October 1945. There was no air crash whatsoever. The only air crash that occurred was on 26th of October 1945, when an American aircraft returning with freed, liberated prisoners of war had crashed, hit a mountain peak and crashed in Taiwan. This is the official narrative of the government of Formosa, of Taiwan. In writing, it has been committed. So therefore, the story, this deception plan had been created by the Japanese Kampetai agency, as I had written earlier, had been carried out by the Japanese Kampetai intelligence agency and under the instructions of Field Marshal Terauchi, the Japanese Field Marshal Terauchi. He was head of their southern command in Southeast Asia, who was a good friend of Bose, and he had helped him escape. Now, this deception plan was deliberately launched by the Japanese Kampetai agency to facilitate the escape of Bose to Manchuria, into Russia and Siberia, to Omsk in Siberia. And this deception plan, however, unfortunately was taken up by the Nehru government and treated as the gospel truth. They wanted to declare Netaji dead, the story over, and quite obviously, what was the reason for trying to declare Netaji dead and over with, get the whole story and the saga over with? Because Nehru quite obviously did not want Netaji back in India as a competitor. He was very sure that had Netaji come back, Nehru would have had very little chance of remaining as the Prime Minister. And the very fact is, it is unfortunate but true that Nehru was selected by the British to be the first Prime Minister of India. They wanted, in negotiations with Mahatma Gandhi, that they would hand over power only to a government led by Prime Minister Nehru. Even though the majority of the working committee members of the Congress committee, had voted for Sardar Patel and not Nehru to be the first Prime Minister of India, it was the British who forced Mahatma Gandhi to insist that Patel would not be the Prime Minister, it would be Nehru, even though he had just his own vote. But he had the backing of the Mahatma, because the Mahatma had been prevailed upon by the British that they could deal only with Nehru. Well, we are aware that Nehru in turn had appointed Lord Louis Mountbatten as the first Governor General of India, and those aspects I will cover later. And the unfortunate impression that one gets is both the British government and the government of India from 1947 onwards connived in trying to spread this canard that Bose had died in the air crash in Taiwan. That was the end of Bose. Story ends, game over. But the fact that emerges from a perusal of these declassified files, it's quite evident that the government of India was aware of this. There were a number of other investigations done by the CIA, done by the Americans, done by the British, which had said that this air crash story is not true. It's not true. But yet the government of India insisted that this was the end of the Bose saga, right? And they are insisting right through till today. Two commissions were established by the Nehruvian government. One was that of Major General Shah Nawaz Khan, who was rewarded with ambassadorship, etc. And the other was by Justice Khosla, very close to the Gandhi family, Indira Gandhi family. And both of them had concluded that yes, Bose died in Taiwan, in the air crash in Taiwan, right? And but the amazing fact was, both these commissions of inquiry did not go to the site of the crash, the alleged site of the crash in Taiwan. The whole theory of the air crash is full of contradictions, full of loopholes. Like I said, it was a deception plan by the Japanese complicity agency, which was very conveniently taken over by the Nehruvian government, by the British Indian government that was about to hand over power because it suited them both to promote the deception narrative. That is what Anuj Dhar and Chandrachud Ghosh have clearly brought out in their monumental work of very patient research, very meticulous research into these files. They have come to the conclusion that the government of India knew. What then was it trying to hide, and why? These are questions that are still we are looking for answers. Now, my initial conclusions were quite similar. I had not had by that time an opportunity like Anuj Dhar and Ghosh have had to go through the entire declassified files. But from whatever was revealed in the media and from other sources and other analysts, it was quite clear that this whole air crash theory was a hoax. It was a deliberate deception operation of the complicity, the Japanese agency. So what then had happened? My initial conclusions in these two books, especially in Bose and Indian Samurai, had been that, Bose had escaped in a Mitsubishi bomber aircraft modified for dropping agents behind enemy lines. This had been assigned to him by Field Marshal Terauchi, the Southern Army commander of Japan, who led the operations in the whole of Southeast Asia. Right? He was a great friend of Bose and he wanted him to escape. And he therefore had allocated to him this aircraft, which along with Lieutenant General Shedai, a Russian-speaking general of the Japanese army, who was an expert in armistice negotiations, surrender negotiations. They had both gone in this aircraft. They had landed in Manchuria. The reports were that Bose had then gotten into a jeep with General Shedai, and he had taken 2 suitcases worth of gold which had been given by the diaspora in Southeast Asia to continue the war of liberation against Great Britain and to fight for the freedom of India, now from Russia. Why Russia? Because, let me tell you up front, I had said then and I repeat, on 22nd October 1943, Bose had made the declaration of independence from Singapore, right? And he had then declared war against Great Britain and the United States. He had then sought recognition from the various governments of the world, and apart from Germany, Japan, Italy, the major Axis powers, the Free Government of India in Exile, led by Bose, had also been recognized by the Soviet Union. In fact, in December of 1943, as per the historical records, the Azad Hind government had established an embassy in Omsk in Siberia. Omsk, incidentally, was the place to which the Russian government had moved its headquarters, less Stalin, who had stayed on in Moscow to direct operations. The rest of the government and most of the industries of the Soviet Union had been moved to Siberia to keep them out of the range of the German bombers. This is where Kato Kaichu, variously, this appeared to be a Japanese code name. Kato Kaino, Kato Kaichu, these are the 2 names mentioned, was the head of that embassy from the INA in Omsk in Siberia. And all along, the plan of Bose was to somehow, in case Japan lost the war, and they had known of this much earlier, that Germany had surrendered, Japan was on the verge of surrender, especially after Russia had intervened, and when of course the 2 atom bombs were dropped, they had surrendered. So all this was known, and Bose was a very meticulous planner. He had done detailed contingency planning of what he would do in such a contingency. So as per the initial theory, most of the research done by Iqbal Malhotra, documentary filmmaker and a very meticulous researcher in his own right, he had stated that he had flown to Omsk in Siberia. The speculations thereafter were, before we get to the speculation, the hard facts. There were 3 broadcasts after the so-called air crash in Taiwan, which Bose had made on 31-meter band, right? And these were on 26 December 1945. The next broadcast was on 1st January 1946, and the third broadcast was on 19th February 1946. This was the last broadcast. Don't forget that on 18th February 1946, the mutiny had taken place, the revolt against the British had taken place in the Royal Indian Navy, mainly on 79 ships out of the 80-ship fleet in Mumbai and Karachi. And they had gone around the streets of Mumbai carrying the photographs of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose shouting Jai Hind, Jai Hind. And this had shaken the British to the core and made them flee India in 1947. Even though they had won the Second World War in 1945, by August 1947 they were out of India because the top British generals in India, Field Marshal Viscount Wavell, who was the Viceroy, and Field Marshal Claude Auchinleck, who was the Commander-in-Chief of the British Indian Army, had both put down in writing that there is likely to be a minor revolt in spring 1946 and a major revolt by June 1946 in the British Indian Armed Forces, which were then 2.5 million, 25 lakh strong. And there were only 40,000 Gora troops in India, and there was no way they could hold. So they had suggested that we should get out in time. We just have 18 months, before which we must commence negotiations for transfer of power. This was the recommendation of the British military chiefs in India and the Viceroy himself. Initially, there was a lot of skepticism in London, but when the revolt happened on 18th of February 46, well, they had rushed Lord Pethick Lawrence, Secretary of State for India, to commence the transfer of power negotiations. Not with the INA, with Nehru, with Gandhi, with Patel. And Nehru, as we all know, more or less people are suggesting that he almost collaborated with the British, both for his own reasons and because the British found him Eton, Harrow educated, British educated with very strong British sensibilities. So they trusted him more than any other Indian, and they handed over power to an Anglophile called Nehru, not to the people because of whom India actually became free. Now let's get to this, leads to some very interesting questions. And as far as the last aspects are concerned, we have gone to the transfer of power archives in London, which were declassified in 1977. I have included those letters from the British commander-in-chiefs in, photocopied them and attached them to this book, right? And it is crystal clear why the British left. Don't speculate why the British left. Let Bipin Chandra Pal, a court historian, not tell us what forced the British to go. As per him, it was the fasting of Gandhi and Nehru and the spinning of charkhas and the peaceful non-violent agitation which forced the British to go. Spurred by Netaji, Gandhiji had been almost forced to launch the Quit India movement in 42. It had been crushed. Now you tell us that suddenly 3 years later, after it was crushed, 6 years later after it was crushed, the British suddenly decided, oh, what an impact it had had, let us give freedom to India. I mean, it is utter nonsense. It is infantile to expect any serious academic to believe such concocted stories. Now we have the evidence. Please go to the British Transfer of Power archives, go to the statements made by British Prime Minister Lord Clement Attlee himself to Justice P.B. Chakrabarti. You don't want to believe that because you say it is hearsay, second, third hand evidence. Well, then go to the Transfer of Power archives, read if you have the eyes. But now I am trying to come back to the wounds, that Bose story, in the Bose story, which Anuj Dhar and Ghosh have reopened. They have reopened those wounds. The government of India knew all along what had happened, and it is something to hide. It's amazing. So many governments have changed, and yet the stance seems to be stubbornly the same, as if some national secrets would be out, as if somebody would be hung in the Hague Tribunal, International Court of Justice or something for shielding a war criminal. I don't know, whatever it is. But the simple fact is that something is still being hidden from the people of India. Something is still being kept closeted, despite all the disclosure of files, etc. And I think we have to get to the bottom of this mystery once and for all. So let me pick up the threads from where Anuj Dhar and Bose have left off in their latest book. My initial conclusions were that Bose had escaped to Manchuria in a Mitsubishi bomber aircraft modified for dropping agents behind Japanese lines. That he had reached Manchuria, that he had surrendered to the SMERSH counterintelligence agency of the Soviet Union, then led by Viktor Abakumov, and his number 2 was Colonel Otrekhin. He had surrendered to them, and they had taken him to Omsk in Siberia, from where he made 3 broadcasts which were recorded in Kolkata in India by the Intelligence Bureau of the British era. These have been declassified by the West Bengal government. 3 broadcasts, proof positive that Bose was alive after August 1945. We have the trail till 19th of February 1946, when the last broadcast was made. And thereafter, there is a total, utter silence, a total and utter blank that we have drawn despite all efforts by so many researchers. The veil is lifting slowly. More will lift when the British declassify some very sensitive files after 100 years. The French have to declassify certain files because most of the action happened in Vietnam, in Saigon, in Ho Chi Minh City now, which was then under the French. So now some startling new inputs have come in, which seem to suggest, and even Anuj Dhar and Ghosh have stated that he did not fly, Shedai was not on that flight with Bose. So major plank of the Iqbal Malhotra narrative, now there is a bit of a question mark. So how did Bose escape? He did get to the Soviet Union, he did get to Omsk in Siberia, to the Free India government of exile in Omsk in Siberia. He did get there. From there he did make 3 broadcasts which were recorded. So how did he get to Russia? There is a brand new story, a startling story. You see, the simple fact is that Bose was a very meticulous planner. He did lot of contingency planning. He looked and foresaw ahead. He anticipated situations. That is one of his strongest plus points. He was a great visionary. He foresaw that India would not get independence unless it fought for it. He foresaw that the Germans and the Japanese would lose. But regardless of the outcome of Second World War, India would be free. These are the exact words of Bose. He was a visionary. So you think he wasn't aware that Japan was about to surrender, Germany had already surrendered, how long could Japan continue alone? He had already done his contingency planning of what he would do. He was very clear that he would escape to Manchuria, join the Russian forces and carry on the war for the liberation of India from the Soviet Union, period. That was his planning. Now the new story that is emerging is startling, extremely startling in fact. How did he escape to Russia if he did not go in that aircraft provided by Field Marshal Terauchi? When an aircraft takes off, it has a lot of radio traffic. The British, the Americans, the Allies were monitoring that radio traffic, and they were quite prepared to shoot down any such aircraft if they suspected that Bose was trying to escape in that aircraft. That is why when he escaped from Germany in 1943 from Kiel in Germany, Hitler did not allow him to fly in an aircraft, even towards the Soviet Far East, right? He was sent by a German submarine, he was sent by a German submarine, and I just want to share some very interesting details with you all. You see, Bose had a previous experience of escaping from Germany in a German submarine U-209, which had brought him around the Cape of Good Hope to off the island of Madagascar, where there was the only submarine to submarine transfer of such a senior leader in the World War II, when a Japanese I-29 submarine had come, and that is a totally different saga which I have recounted in my book, heroic saga of how he, even in a storm, transferred from one submarine to the other, right, and that brought him to Malaysia and finally to Japan. So he had this experience that it would be the safest mode of escape was via submarine, right. Now comes the interesting twist. In Penang, in Malaya, now Malaysia, there was a German submarine squadron which had about 43 submarines, which included Italian submarines which had not surrendered to the Allies, which had become part of the German fleet, and then one of them had been handed over to the Japanese fleet. This Italian submarine was the Luigi Dorelli, an Italian submarine which had been taken over by the Germans after the Italians had surrendered in World War II. It had become part of the German Navy. It had been sent to the Far East to attack Allied shipping there, help Japan, and it was based in Penang in Malaysia, right, which was then under Japanese occupation. Now, this submarine was then subsequently taken over from the Germans by the Japanese. This submarine has a very interesting history. It continued to fight even after the surrender of Japan, because they were operating an Italian submarine. So they thought they could get away with it. And on 30th of August, there was a strange case that when this submarine surfaced in the Sea of Japan and opened fire on an American reconnaissance aircraft and shot it down. What was the need for this submarine to shoot down American reconnaissance aircraft? What was this submarine carrying? What was so important that it did not want to be spotted, that it shot down that submarine? The new theory is, the new input is that Netaji had escaped from Kawabe in Japan in this Italian submarine operated subsequently by the Germans and now by the Japanese. The report is that he was taken close to the shores of Siberia, and thereafter he was transferred to a trawler, and this trawler then took him to Omsk, to the shores of Siberia. From there overland he went to Omsk, the wartime capital of the Soviet Union in Siberia, where an Indian embassy had been established, and from where he made those 3 last radio broadcasts. In those broadcasts, they were not pre-recorded. He was talking of current happenings, a day old. And when they were recorded in Calcutta by the Intelligence Bureau of the British, there was panic and alarm in British India. They were now sure that Bose had escaped to Russia. Now the British, interestingly, had 2 wartime treaties with the Soviet Union. One was of 1941 vintage, the second one was of 1943 vintage. These were on cooperation in intelligence sharing and clandestine operations, secret operations. Under the provisions of this treaty, they approached the Soviet Union. They approached Stalin. They told him Bose is a war criminal. They told him that Bose had been working with Hitler and Mussolini, and if there was one person that Stalin hated, with his utmost venom, it was Hitler. And he was apparently prevailed upon to try, they initially sought custody of Bose. Then there are some very interesting letters that were being come out from the Indian side, the British Indian side, in which the British Home Secretary, who was Robert F. Moody, Home Secretary means the equivalent of the Home Minister now. He is on record. There is a letter. Let him be where he is. He is talking of Bose. Let him be where he is. Don't bring him back to India for trial, etc. No prison will hold him. It will create a bombshell for us. Let him be where he is. So that is step 1. Don't get him back. Logical, extremely logical. No prison could have held Bose. I mean, even the INA prisoners who were put on trial, Dhillon, Sehgal, Shah Nawaz, what an outcry there was in the country. And had Bose been brought in and put in a prison, they would have, the mobs would have been out. So it was quite an intelligent decision on the part of the British government in India to let him be where he is. But would they leave him be? This is where the story becomes sinister. There are speculations, we don't have hard intelligence, we don't have hard empirical proof as yet, but there are speculations that the British government did approach him, the Russians, to interrogate Bose in the prisoner of war camp that he had been assigned to. Iqbal Malhotra seems to feel that Bose had been assigned to prisoner of war camp number 46 in the Lesnevsky district in Siberia. This is where the top Japanese generals were being kept for detailed interrogation, and even the German general von Paulus was incarcerated here. So Bose was brought to this place for detailed interrogation, because in 1946, late 1946, General Alexei Kolesnikov, he has told Indian researchers that Stalin was deciding with Beria and Molotov what to do with Bose. Apparently, it seemed that he had decided that he was a war criminal, that they were still in that we are allies with UK, we are allies with United States, etc. That still hadn't worn off. The Cold War hadn't started in 1946. It was heading towards that, but it hadn't started. So he had him interned, incarcerated in that prison. And from there are two further speculations. One is that he was interrogated by the British and tortured to death. This is the testimony of Satyanarayan Sinha. He is even given the cell number in which he was apparently tortured to death. The second is that Bose was in not the best of health. He was in very poor health. He had already suffered from tuberculosis because of incarceration in horrible conditions in the British prisons in Rangoon. He was suffering from tuberculosis. He was in very poor health. Would he have survived the rigors of a prisoner of war camp in Siberia? Doubtful, extremely doubtful. And could he have escaped from there across Siberia, across Manchuria, into Tibet and into India, or into Chitral and into India, as there were speculations? I find it very difficult to believe. We are all taught escape and evasion in the Indian Armed Forces till this day. It is a thing that continues from the British era, World War I, World War II. You must escape if you are taken a prisoner. But escape and evasion of that order without any help, without any local support, without knowing the language, without extreme cold clothing, surviving in those Siberian minus 40 degrees centigrade is like Siachen. So I have my doubts if he could have made his way to India from there. And I am inclined to go with the view that he was either done to death by the British, or we don't know who, but that he did not survive camp number 46 in Lesnevsky district in Siberia, and possibly there is some unnamed grave there where he is buried. If we can home in onto that, if we can dig out the grave, get to the DNA and do some sampling, maybe that would be the way out. But you have to have with a hypothesis as to where to look for what. That is like looking for a needle in a haystack. So this is the new twist to the Bose saga. The simple fact is that Bose did not die in the air crash. And if the government of India knew, if our intelligence agencies knew, why were they wanting to put a lid on it? Why were they wanting to declare him dead? I mean, it is amazing. It makes no sense on the face of it. What are the compulsions that the government has to hide? I don't think the war criminal angle holds. And whether the government of India would have been complicit if they had said, if they had wanted Bose back. This only adds to the confusion. I am afraid we are still to get to clarity. We will have to await. There are some other reports. Major General A.C. Chatterjee, the Finance Minister of the Free Government of India in exile, he was to also fly to Omsk in Siberia and go to Omsk from there and join up with Netaji. For this purpose, he had gone to Ho Chi Minh City. You see, he had gone to Ho Chi Minh City, now formerly Saigon, and from there he was to catch the flight like Netaji to get to Manchuria. And a British intelligence officer, Colonel Trevor Wilson of the British military intelligence, was sent to capture Chatterjee alive, because it was said that he was trying to escape with $1 million worth of gold to finance the struggle for the freedom of India from Russia. He was trying to fly there and he was captured. His interrogation report is still classified. Another prime witness was number 2 of the INA, Mr. Nambiar, right? Mr. Nambiar. And he had subsequently joined the Indian Foreign Service, and then he had retired in 1961, and he was given a currency, a pension in foreign currency and Swiss francs, and allowed to get away to Europe, right? Therefore, there is another aspect, that there was a Ben Chandy, an INA operative, who was captured by the French. A Captain Frederic Parcel of the French intelligence had tortured this man Chandy in the prison cells in Saigon, right? And then he had been transferred to Pondicherry, a French territory. And then, Mr. Professor More, one of the INA people, he had met him in Pondicherry. And he also seemed to confirm, I understand, that Bose had escaped via submarine to Siberia and gone to Omsk in Siberia. I think this saga is not at all over. I think we need to work much harder. We had asked Russia, Prime Minister Modi himself had gone to Russia and asked for inputs, asked for any information, but the Russians have strenuously denied any knowledge of Bose. Whereas Russian General Kolesnikov, himself mentioned this to one of our lady researchers who had gone there, who's done yeoman service on work in Russia, on trying to establish the Bose trail in Russia. The trail went cold in Russia. We will have to look there. We will have to search there. We will have to await declassification. We'll have to press the Russian government for declassification of some of the KGB files, some of the files of Stalin himself. The crucial files in India were destroyed by Mrs. Gandhi. 13 crucial files were destroyed. So, trying to pick up the trail here will be very difficult. I'm sure there are files in the Intelligence Bureau, but whether they will agree to declassify them or not, because they don't want to set a precedent wherein the most secret of our secrets is laid open after some time. In America it is, in Great Britain and Europe it is, but we still have to wait 100 years for those British files to be declassified. And now there is this French angle happening, because a lot of the action took place in Ho Chi Minh City, in Saigon, in Hanoi. That is from where the flights were taking off from either Manchuria or to Formosa or to anywhere else. And we also will have to look for Penang, Malaysia, where that submarine squadron was based. We'll have to look for Japanese archives on the activities and operations of this German squadron based in Malaysia with 43 submarines on its rolls. They had been carrying out operations, and this Italian submarine which had been taken over by the Japanese, now seems to be the candidate, prime candidate, as the means of escape for Bose to Siberia and to Omsk. I don't think we can rest till we get to the bottom of this saga. The more we delve into it, the more confusing, the more controversial it becomes. But this, so help us God, is one thing that we must get to the bottom of. This is one mystery that we must resolve. It concerns who we are and how we became a free nation. Jai Bharat, Jai Hind.